Margaret's Final Dance, a Family Feud story. The Family Feud studio gleamed under its signature bright lights, each beam carefully calibrated to create that perfect blend of warmth and energy that had made the show America's living room entertainment for decades. The iconic blue and gold set sparkled with fresh polish, while 300 audience members filled the seats with the kind of anticipatory energy that only live television could generate. Steve Harvey stood at his familiar mark, adjusting his perfectly tailored navy blue suit, the fabric catching the studio lights as he prepared to welcome two families whose stories would soon remind everyone watching that love's greatest victories often come disguised as life's most difficult challenges. Behind the cameras, producers scanned their final notes, ensuring every detail was perfect for what they expected to be another heartwarming hour of family competition. The familiar pre-show rhythm filled the air, clipboard-wielding assistants confirming contestant details, camera operators testing their angles, and audience coordinators reminding viewers about applause cues. None of them realized they were about to capture something that would transcend entertainment and become a testament to the kind of love that refuses to surrender, even when memory itself becomes the enemy. The studio audience represented the beautiful tapestry of American families, young couples holding hands and dreaming of their future together, parents juggling work schedules to share this experience with their children, and older couples who understood that every shared moment was a gift, not to be taken for granted. What they would witness today would send many of them home with renewed appreciation for the person sleeping beside them, the memories they were creating together, and the profound truth that love's greatest test isn't whether it can survive happiness, but whether it can endure when everything familiar begins to fade away. "Welcome back to Family Feud," Steve announced, his voice carrying that distinctive blend of warmth and enthusiasm that had endeared him to millions. "I'm your host, Steve Harvey, and we have two incredible families here today, ready to compete for $20,000. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, their energy washing over the studio like a wave of pure joy. This was more than entertainment. It was a celebration of family bonds, shared experiences, and the uniquely human ability to find laughter and connection, even in life's most challenging moments. Playing today, Steve continued with theatrical flair, we have the Thompson family from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He gestured toward the first podium with his characteristic enthusiasm. And competing against them, we have the Rodriguez family from Phoenix, Arizona. At the Thompson podium stood a family whose very presence seemed to anchor the studio in something both timeless and urgently precious. At the center, holding the first position with quiet dignity, stood Margaret Thompson, 74 years old, whose silver hair was styled in elegant waves that caught the studio lights like spun moonbeams. Her hands, still graceful despite their age, rested on the podium with the practiced poise of someone who had spent decades teaching others to move with grace and purpose. Margaret wore a soft lavender dress that her late mother had always said brought out her eyes, and around her neck hung a simple pearl necklace, a gift from her husband Harold on their 25th wedding anniversary. But it was her eyes that truly commanded attention. Blue as October skies, they held depths of wisdom, love, and a carefully guarded sadness that spoke of battles fought in private, victories measured not in prizes, but in precious moments, preserved against impossible odds. Beside Margaret stood her daughter Sarah, 52, a high school principal, whose protective stance and gentle smile revealed a woman who had inherited her mother's strength, while learning to carry burdens she had never imagined facing. Sarah's husband Michael, 54, completed the adult generation, his construction worker hands and warm demeanor speaking of a man who understood that some things in life were worth building, and others worth protecting. Completing the Thompson lineup were Margaret's grandchildren, Emma, 24, a physical therapy student whose choice of career suddenly made more sense in the context of her family's journey, and Jake, a college senior whose easy smile masked the weight of watching his grandfather slip away one memory at a time. The Thompson family's journey to this moment had been sparked by a conversation that had changed everything. Occurring just 3 months earlier, during one of Margaret's increasingly rare moments of respite. Harold, 76, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease 2 years ago, and Margaret had transformed their quiet retirement into a round-the-clock mission of love, care, and desperate preservation of the man she had loved for over 50 years. "Mom," Sarah had said gently during one of her weekly visits, "you need to take care of yourself too. When's the last time you did something just for you?" Margaret had paused in her stirring of Harold's favorite soup, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I dance with your father every evening," she had replied simply. "We dance to the songs from our first date, our wedding, all the important moments. Sometimes he remembers the steps. Sometimes he remembers me. Sometimes he just moves because the music feels familiar. But we dance." It was Emma who had suggested the Family Feud application. "Grandma Margaret, you've been watching that show for 30 years, she had argued. "Steve Harvey makes you laugh like nothing else does. And maybe it would give Grandpa Harold something new to watch, something that might spark a memory, or just bring him joy." The application had been filled out during one of Harold's afternoon naps, Margaret's careful handwriting recording their family story with the same precision she had once used to teach dance steps to eager students. She had written about their 5-decade love story, about Harold's battle with Alzheimer's, and about how dancing had become their language when words began to fail them. At the Rodriguez podium, the competing family presented their own portrait of resilience and love. Carlos Rodriguez, 48, stood with his wife Elena, 46, their teenage twins Maria and Diego, 17, and Carlos's father Antonio, 72, whose own journey as a caregiver for his late wife had given him profound empathy for what the Thompson family was experiencing. The Rodriguez family had their own story of love tested by time and circumstance. But as they would soon discover, some battles transcend competition and create unexpected bonds between strangers who understand that certain fights are too important to face alone. Steve Harvey, unaware of the deeper currents running beneath the surface of this seemingly standard episode, launched into his pre-game interviews with his characteristic blend of humor and genuine curiosity. "Now Margaret," he said, focusing his attention on the Thompson family matriarch, 75 years young and looking absolutely beautiful. "Tell me, what's your secret?" Margaret's face lit up with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire studio, transforming her from an elegant elderly woman into someone whose inner light made age irrelevant. "Well, Steve, I've always believed that you stay young by moving. I was a dance instructor for 40 years, and I learned that when you stop moving, you start dying. So I make sure to dance every single day." Steve's eyebrows raised with interest. "Every day? Now that sounds like somebody who knows how to live. Who do you dance with?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and something shifted in Margaret's expression, a shadow that passed so quickly most people might have missed it. But Steve Harvey had developed an instinct for reading the subtle emotional currents that ran beneath his contestants' words. "I dance with my husband Harold," Margaret said, her voice steady but carrying undertones that spoke of stories too complex for simple answers. "We've been married 52 years, and we still dance together every evening. He has Alzheimer's disease, Steve, but his body still remembers how to move to music, even when his mind forgets other things." The studio fell quiet, the audience sensing that this conversation had moved beyond typical game show banter into something more profound. Steve, following his instincts, stepped closer to the Thompson podium. "Margaret, that's beautiful. How long has Harold been fighting this?" 2 years since the diagnosis," Margaret replied, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about the man who had been her partner in all things. "But if I'm honest, I think I knew something was changing about a year before that. Little things at first, forgetting where he put his keys, asking me the same question twice in one conversation. I told myself it was just normal aging. I think we all tell ourselves that until we can't anymore." Sarah stepped slightly closer to her mother, a gesture of support that spoke of countless conversations difficult decisions, and the particular pain that comes from watching someone you love struggle with something you cannot fix. "What's the hardest part?" Steve asked gently, his professional persona giving way to genuine compassion. Margaret considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, looking out at the audience as if she could see every viewer who was facing their own version of this battle. "The hardest part," she said slowly, "is watching him struggle to find words for feelings that are still so strong. Harold may not always remember my name, but when I put on our wedding song and offer him my hand, his whole face lights up. His body remembers loving me, even when his mind can't hold on to the details of our life together." The studio had grown completely silent, 300 people holding their breath as they witnessed something that transcended entertainment and touched the universal human fear of losing the people we love most. "We've converted our living room into a dance floor," Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength from the truth of her story. "Every evening, after dinner, I put on music from different eras of our life together. Sometimes it's The Way You Look Tonight from our first date in 19. Sometimes it's At Last from our wedding. Sometimes it's songs our children loved when they were little, or music from vacations we took together." She paused, gathering herself before continuing. "Some nights, Harold leads me through a perfect foxtrot, and for those 3 minutes, he's completely himself again. Other nights, he just sways with me and hums along to melodies he can't quite place, but still find beautiful. And some nights," her voice caught slightly, "some nights he doesn't recognize the music or me, but he still moves because something deep inside him remembers that dancing equals love." Steve Harvey, who had interviewed thousands of contestants over his career and thought he'd heard every possible variation of the human experience, found himself genuinely moved by Margaret's story. "Margaret," he said softly, "you're not just taking care of your husband, you're fighting for your love story." "Every single day," Margaret replied with quiet determination. "Because love doesn't stop being love just because it gets harder to remember. If anything, it becomes more precious." Behind the scenes, the show's producers faced a decision that would define this episode: keep the standard format and risk trivializing something profound, or allow this moment to breathe and become what it needed to be. The head producer, watching from the control room, made a choice that honored the humanity of what was unfolding. "Margaret," Steve said, his voice carrying new gravity, "I want to do something different today. I want to celebrate not just your family but your love story. Would you be willing to share one of those dances with us?" Margaret's eyes widened slightly in surprise, then filled with an emotion that looked suspiciously like gratitude mixed with hope. "Steve, Harold isn't here. He's at home with our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. He doesn't travel well anymore. Gets confused by new places." Steve nodded understandingly, then made a decision that would be remembered long after the episode aired. "Then dance for him. Dance for all the couples out there who are fighting this same fight. Show us what love looks like when it refuses to give up." The studio crew, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented, quickly adjusted the lighting and sound system. Steve's personal assistant, who had been moved to tears by Margaret's story, had already contacted the production music library. "What song would you like?" Steve asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. "The Way You Look Tonight. It was playing when Harold first asked me to dance at the church social in Cedar Rapids. He was so nervous his hands were shaking, but he still asked. That song has been our song for 53 years. As the opening notes filled the studio, Margaret stepped away from her podium and moved to the center of the stage. For a moment she stood alone under the lights, an elegant 74-year-old woman in a lavender dress, and then something magical happened. Margaret began to dance. Not the careful, measured movements one might expect from an elderly woman, but the fluid, graceful steps of someone whose body held the memory of thousands of hours spent moving to music, teaching others to find rhythm and beauty in simple movement. She danced as if Harold were there with her, her arms positioned to hold an invisible partner, her steps perfect for a couple in love. As she moved, Margaret began to speak, her voice carrying over the music to every corner of the suddenly sacred studio space. Harold was 24 when we met, she said, spinning gracefully. I was 22 and teaching dance at the community center. He came to the church social with his best friend Tom, who was trying to impress a girl in my dance class. She executed a perfect turn, her eyes closed as if she could see her young husband clearly in her memory. He was so handsome in his blue suit, he'd saved for 3 months to buy it, and so nervous. He watched me dance with other men for 2 hours before Tom finally pushed him onto the floor during a slow song. The audience was completely spellbound, no longer watching a game show, but witnessing something that felt like a love letter written in movement and memory. When the song started, Harold took my hand and said, "Ma'am, I don't really know what I'm doing, but would you be willing to teach me?" And I said, "Honey, if you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." Margaret's voice caught with emotion as she continued the dance, each step a testament to love that had survived decades, challenges, and now the cruelest test of all. We've been dancing together ever since. Through pregnancies when I could barely move, through Harold's back surgery when he could barely stand, through good times and hard times and all the ordinary beautiful times in between. She slowed her movement as the song neared its end, her voice growing softer but more powerful. As the music faded, Margaret came to rest in the center of the stage, her arms still positioned as if holding her beloved husband. The studio was absolutely silent for a long moment, 300 people processing what they had just witnessed. Then Steve Harvey began to clap slowly at first, then with increasing intensity. The audience joined him, rising to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But this wasn't typical game show applause. This was recognition, gratitude, and acknowledgement of something sacred. When the applause finally subsided, Steve walked over to Margaret, who was wiping tears from her eyes but smiling with a radiance that seemed to light up the entire studio. "Margaret," Steve said, his own voice thick with emotion, "in 40 years of television, have never seen anything more beautiful than what you just shared with us. That wasn't just a dance. That was a love story, a lesson, and a reminder of what really matters in this life." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. "I want to do something, and I need your permission first. Can we call Harold? Can we let him hear this audience showing you the love and respect you deserve?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded enthusiastically. "He's probably watching. Mrs. Patterson always has the show on during the day. She says it keeps him calm." Within minutes, the production team had Harold on speakerphone. His voice, slightly confused but clearly loving, came through the studio speakers. "Margaret, honey, where are you?" "I'm at the Family Feud studio, Harold. Remember? I told you I was coming to be on TV today." There was a pause, then Harold's voice, clearer now. "Oh yes. You look beautiful, sweetheart. You always look beautiful when you dance." The studio audience erupted again, but Steve quickly gestured for quiet so Harold could continue speaking. "Are you dancing for them?" Harold asked. And in his voice, everyone could hear echoes of the man who had fallen in love with a dance instructor 53 years ago. "I danced for you, honey," Margaret replied, speaking directly into the microphone. "I danced our song." "Margaret," Harold's voice carried across the studio with startling clarity, "you make every day feel like dancing, even when I forget how to move." There wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Steve Harvey, the man who had built his career on laughter and entertainment, found himself crying openly on national television. "Harold," Steve said into the microphone, "this is Steve Harvey. Your wife just reminded all of us what real love looks like. You're a lucky man." "I know," Harold replied simply. "I may forget a lot of things, but I never forget that I love her." After the call ended, Steve made a decision that would cement this moment in television history. Instead of continuing with the traditional Family Feud format, he invited both families to the center of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the studio audience, Today we learned something more valuable than any game show prize. We learned that love doesn't end when life gets difficult. It just finds new ways to express itself. He turned to address both families directly. Thompson family, Rodriguez family. You both came here to compete for money. But Margaret just showed us that the real prize is love, that refuses to give up, dedication that deepens with difficulty, and the courage to keep dancing even when the music becomes hard to hear. Steve reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Both families are going home with the full $20,000. Because today we're celebrating not just winners, but the reminder that we're all in this together, that we all face challenges that test our love, and that sometimes the most beautiful moments come when we choose to dance anyway. But Steve wasn't finished. He addressed the camera directly, speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home. If you're watching this and you're taking care of someone with dementia, Alzheimer's, or any condition that steals memory, I want you to know something. You're not alone. Margaret Thompson just showed us that love doesn't require perfect memory. It requires perfect commitment, and that kind of love changes the world, one dance at a time. The episode that aired became the most watched in Family Feud history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about caregiving, love in the face of loss, and the importance of cherishing every moment we have with the people we love. The Alzheimer's Association reported a 300% increase in support group participation in the weeks following the episode, with many participants citing Margaret's story as their inspiration to seek community and support. Margaret returned home to Cedar Rapids to find thousands of letters from viewers sharing their own stories of love, tested by disease, loss, and time. Each letter was answered personally, with Margaret writing back in her careful script, sharing encouragement, practical advice, and the reminder that every day of love is a victory worth celebrating. The video of Margaret's dance became one of the most shared clips in social media history. But perhaps more importantly, it inspired countless families to create their own rituals of connection. Dance studios across the country began offering classes specifically for couples dealing with memory loss, understanding that movement could be a bridge when words failed. Harold and Margaret continued their evening dances for another 8 months after the episode aired. Harold's condition progressed as everyone knew it would, but the video of Margaret's Family Feud dance played on their television every evening, reminding him of the woman who loved him enough to dance alone, so he would never truly be alone. When Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep the following spring, Margaret played their wedding song at his funeral. She didn't dance that day, but she stood at his casket and told everyone gathered that love like theirs doesn't end with death. It just learns new steps. 6 months after Harold's passing, Margaret began teaching dance again, this time volunteering at memory care facilities throughout Iowa. Her classes weren't about perfect technique or complicated choreography. They were about the simple truth that movement is memory, that music is medicine, and that love finds a way to express itself even when everything else fails. Steve Harvey often spoke about Margaret in interviews, crediting her with teaching him something profound about the nature of commitment and love. She showed me that when we promise in sickness and in health, we're not just making a vow, he would say. We're choosing to dance with someone through every season of life, even when the music gets quiet, even when the steps become uncertain, even when we have to dance alone so they'll never feel alone. The scholarship fund established from the episode's overwhelming response specifically supported research into music and movement therapy for dementia patients, ensuring that Margaret's insight about dancing and memory would continue to help families facing similar battles. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of that day was captured in a letter that arrived at the Family Feud offices, exactly 1 year after Margaret's appearance. Dear Steve and the Family Feud team, Margaret Thompson wanted me to write this letter because her arthritis makes writing difficult now, but her spirit remains unbreakable. She wants you to know that Harold watched that episode dozens of times in his final months, and that every time the video played, he would reach for her hand and say, "Dance with me, beautiful." She wants families to know that love doesn't require perfect memory, perfect health, or perfect circumstances. It just requires the willingness to keep showing up, keep moving together, and keep believing that some things are too precious to surrender. Margaret still dances every evening, and now she's teaching others that love like theirs is possible for anyone brave enough to keep dancing when the music gets hard to hear. Because sometimes the most powerful moments happen not when everything is perfect, but when love chooses to dance anyway. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are written not with words, but with movement, memory, and the revolutionary act of refusing to give up on someone whose mind may be slipping away, but whose heart still knows how to love. That's not just entertainment. That's a masterclass in what it means to love someone, not just for better, but especially for worse. Not just in health, but most courageously in sickness. Not just when love is easy, but most beautifully when love requires everything you have to give.